The presentation room within the Galactic Council hall was a cathedral of light and crystalline brilliance, every surface shimmering with polished elegance. Rion Cade squinted under the glaring luminescence, feeling the weight of 100 alien eyes boring into him. The delegates of the council, a sprawling assembly of species wrapped in robes, scales, bioluminescent veils, and undulating tentacles, watched with expressions ranging from disdain to outright amusement. Rion cleared his throat, his hand brushing against the rough metallic casing of the hyperspace relay prototype beside him. Unlike the sleek, seamless designs of council-approved tech, his device looked like it had been assembled in a scrapyard by a lunatic with a glue gun. And, in fairness, that wasn't far from the truth. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "I stand here representing humanity. New, sure, but innovative nonetheless. I believe our approach to hyperspace stabilization could enhance the galaxy's transportation efficiency." "Enhance?" scoffed a delegate from the Torvalian coalition, his voice a series of clicking baritones. His 3 crimson eyes glowed brighter. "The Terrans bring us a pile of junk and call it innovation?" Chuckles rippled through the chamber. Rion felt the blood rise to his face, but he pressed on, gripping the edge of the podium. "Our methods may not conform to council standards, but progress doesn't always come from conformity." "Progress?" This time the voice belonged to a Zyvern diplomat, whose iridescent exoskeleton flashed in irritation. "Humans! Always stumbling into technology by accident. You cannot even maintain basic stability in your own atmosphere." Rion grinned, masking the flutter of nerves in his chest. "You're not wrong. We stumble. But sometimes the best discoveries happen when you don't stick to the plan." Without waiting for more jeers, he pressed a button on his prototype. The device hummed to life, a low, discordant whir that built in intensity. A few delegates leaned forward, curiosity flickering across their faces. The device's panels glowed faintly, sputtering erratically like a campfire struggling to catch. "This is an Earth-made hyperspace relay," Rion said, "with a twist." The device shuddered, then released a sudden pulse of energy. A visible ripple shot through the chamber, and for a split second, the air seemed to crackle with static. The delegates froze, their collective murmurs silenced. Rion held his breath. Then, the relay emitted a soft chime, stabilizing into a steady, rhythmic hum. On the council's main holodisplay, a map of the galaxy flickered into view, with precise hyperspace lanes glowing brighter than ever before. The delegates stared, slack-jawed, as the pathways realigned, correcting minuscule inefficiencies that had plagued interstellar travel for centuries. A small improvement, but one that could save untold energy and time across the galaxy. Rion suppressed a smug grin. "As you can see, our mistakes sometimes lead to—" The device let out a sharp crack, sparks flying as smoke hissed from its seams. The elegant map flickered and glitched, momentarily replaced by static and garbled imagery. Rion's grin faltered. A delegate shrieked, while another ducked behind their seat. The device sputtered, then powered down with a defeated whine. "Ah," Rion muttered, "still working out a few kinks." The chamber erupted in chaos. Some delegates bellowed in anger, others muttered insults under their breath. Rion heard words like primitive and dangerous, tossed around freely. "Typical," hissed the Zyvern diplomat. "They can't even make their toys work." "Wait," came a deep, gravelly voice from the rear of the chamber. The murmurs fell to a hush as Jorek Thane, a grizzled, battle-worn veteran representing the Terran consortium, stepped forward. His reptilian features were severe, his golden eyes glinting like molten steel. "Play that back," Jorek demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "Show the lanes again." A technician reluctantly obeyed, rewinding the relay's output. The stabilized hyperspace map reappeared, its optimized pathways unmistakable. Even the most advanced council simulations hadn't achieved that level of precision. Jorek studied it for a long moment before turning to the assembly. "This junk, as you call it, might be onto something." "It's unstable," the Torvalian delegate snapped. "Unstable, yes," Jorek admitted, his gaze locking onto Rion with an intensity that made the engineer's skin prickle. But functional. And bold. We could use a bit of that. Before anyone could argue further, the chamber's central alarm blared. Lights dimmed, replaced by a pulsating crimson glow. Delegates recoiled as a holographic projection filled the air, an expanding singularity tearing apart a nearby star system. The image crackled with raw power, the gravitational tendrils consuming everything in their path. "This is a live feed from the Calavar sector," announced an AI voice. "Singularity growth accelerating, star system destabilization imminent." The room descended into stunned silence, broken only by the faint hum of the holofeed. Rion stared at the singularity, its swirling vortex a terrifying blend of chaos and inevitability. It was like staring into the universe's heartbeat gone mad. A voice cut through the silence, brittle with panic. "The containment systems are failing." The Zivran diplomat stepped forward, his calm facade cracking. "We've thrown every resource at this. The containment fields, flawless designs, cannot withstand the singularity's pull." "And the artifact?" Jorek asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The Zivran hesitated, still unresponsive. "What artifact?" Rion asked, narrowing his eyes. "Enough," snapped the Torvalian delegate. "This is beyond human understanding. Leave it to us." Jorek's eyes flicked to Rion, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You might want to rethink that." Moments later, in the Council's war room, a space dominated by holographic star charts and frantic strategists, Rion stood awkwardly between Jorek and Alira Vonn. The telepath's sharp green eyes seemed to dissect him, as if peeling back his thoughts layer by layer. She said nothing, but her silence was heavy, charged. "Well?" Rion asked, trying to lighten the tension. "Do I get to play hero, or are you just here to babysit?" Alira's lips twitched, though whether it was amusement or annoyance, Rion couldn't tell. Jorek spoke first. "This singularity will collapse the sector," Jorek said bluntly, "and maybe beyond. The Council's tech isn't working. We're betting on you because no one else is reckless enough to try." "Flattering," Rion said dryly. "But you've seen my track record. I make things worse before they get better." Jorek's reptilian features softened into what might have been a smile. "Sometimes, worse is exactly what we need." "Great," Rion muttered, turning to Alira. "And you? Any words of encouragement?" She tilted her head, her voice soft but firm. "You've already changed the galaxy once today, Cade. Let's see if you can do it again." As the war room's doors sealed behind them, Rion felt the enormity of the task settle on his shoulders. The singularity loomed in his mind, a churning force of destruction, and somewhere in its heart, a mystery waited, dark and impenetrable. He took a deep breath, the metallic tang of the war room mingling with the faint scent of ozone from the prototype in his hands. "Well, no pressure," he said aloud, forcing a grin. "Let's save the galaxy with duct tape and dumb luck." Neither Jorek nor Alira laughed. Rion Cade tightened the straps of his tool harness, his hands trembling as he surveyed the dimly lit hangar that served as their makeshift workshop. The metallic tang of coolant and solder filled the air, mingling with the faint acrid smell of scorched wiring. The hyperspace relay, his genius mistake, sat dismantled in the center of the room, its guts spilling out in a chaotic mess of wires and conduits. Sparks showered from an overworked plasma torch in the corner, the light illuminating Jorek Thane's hulking frame as he argued with a technician. "You're stripping it too thin," Jorek barked, his gravelly voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "Do you want the whole thing to blow when we need it most?" The technician flinched but nodded, redoubling his efforts to reinforce the delicate circuitry. Jorek turned, his piercing golden eyes locking onto Rion. "Do you even have a plan? Or is this still the duct tape and dumb luck phase?" Rion smirked, though his stomach churned with doubt. "Dumb luck got us this far, didn't it? Let's not jinx a good thing." Alira Vonn's presence was almost spectral as she stepped into view, her quiet movements unsettling in their grace. She held a datapad close to her chest, the faint glow casting angular shadows across her face. Her eyes, sharp and impossibly green, lingered on Rion with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "You're stalling," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "You know as well as I do this won't hold under real stress." "I'm aware. Thanks," Rion replied, pulling a frayed wire from the relay's guts. "But unless you've got another ancient alien artifact hidden up your sleeve, this is all we've got." Alira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set the datapad on the table, the screen flashing with grainy, distorted symbols, remnants of the holographic message triggered in the council chamber. The alien language twisted and reformed as though alive, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to vibrate in Rion's teeth. "I've been decoding the artifact's data," she said. "It's incomplete, but it's clear the singularity wasn't meant to exist naturally. It was created, controlled." "Controlled?" Jorek's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "By who?" "By something ancient," Alira said, her tone betraying a sliver of unease. "The artifact isn't just a key, it's a message, a warning." The weight of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Rion wiped sweat from his brow, the back of his hand streaking grease across his skin. "Great," he muttered. "We're on a first-name basis with galactic boogeymen now." Before anyone could respond, a loud clang echoed through the hangar, followed by a sharp curse. One of the junior engineers had dropped a stabilizer coil, the heavy component rolling across the floor with a metallic groan. Rion sighed and bent to retrieve it, his fingers brushing the cold, dented surface. The coil felt heavier than it should have. An omen? Or just exhaustion playing tricks on him? The tension in the hangar was electric as the team worked through the night. Tools clanged, sparks flew, and the rhythmic hiss of welding torches punctuated the silence. Rion's hands ached, every joint screaming in protest as he reassembled the relay's core with agonizing precision. His mind buzzed with half-formed theories and improbable solutions, each one crazier than the last. Jorek loomed nearby, his imposing presence both reassuring and unnerving. "You're going to burn out," he said bluntly, crossing his arms. "Take a break before you short-circuit yourself." Rion shook his head, his voice tight. "Can't. If we don't stabilize the relay, we won't even make it to the singularity, let alone stop it." "Your call," Jorek said, though his tone suggested he thought it was the wrong one. Across the room, Alira sat alone at a console, her expression inscrutable as she scrolled through lines of alien text. Rion watched her for a moment, noting the way her fingers hovered just above the screen, as though she feared what she might uncover. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but the words caught in his throat. The quiet shattered as a low, insistent alarm blared from the console. Alira's head snapped up, her sharp intake of breath audible even from across the room. Rion abandoned his work and rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "What is it?" he asked, his voice taut. "The artifact," Alira said, her eyes wide. "It's resonating." The datapad vibrated violently, the alien symbols on its screen spiraling into a chaotic, unreadable mess. A deep thrumming sound filled the air, vibrating through the walls and floor. Rion staggered back as the artifact, secured in a containment unit nearby, began to glow, its light pulsating in time with the deafening hum. Jorek drew his sidearm, his gaze darting between the artifact and the surrounding shadows. "Is it supposed to do that?" "No!" Rion snapped, grabbing a nearby stabilizer rod. "Alira, shut it down!" "I can't!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the rising noise. "It's responding to something external." The hum reached a fever pitch, and for a split second the world seemed to fold in on itself. Rion felt an inexplicable pull, as though gravity itself had shifted. The artifact's glow intensified, its light filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly brilliance. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the resonance stopped. The artifact dimmed, its surface cooling to an inert state. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Rion's ragged breathing. "What the hell was that?" Jorek growled, his weapon still drawn. Rion shook his head, his fingers gripping the edge of the console for support. "No idea, but whatever it wasn't friendly." Alira's voice was barely above a whisper. "The artifact, it's reaching out. Something's answering. Ryan's stomach churned. The thought of someone, responding to the artifact sent a chill down his spine. He glanced at Jorek, whose expression had hardened into something unreadable. "We need to move faster," Rion said, his voice steadier than he felt. "If that singularity is a gate, we're running out of time to figure out what's on the other side." Jorek nodded grimly, holstering his weapon. "Then stop wasting it. Get that thing working." Rion turned back to the relay, his mind racing. Every nerve in his body screamed for rest, but the stakes were too high. He grabbed his tools and dove back into the chaotic mess of wires and circuits, his determination burning brighter than the sparks flying around him. Somewhere in the void, a singularity churned, growing ever larger, and deep within its heart, something stirred. The ship jolted as it broke through the outer edge of the dying planet's atmosphere, the turbulence rattling loose panels and filling the cabin with a low, menacing groan. The air reeked of heated metal and the acrid tang of stressed circuitry. Rion Cade clutched the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white as he stared out the viewport. Below, the planet sprawled like a decaying carcass. Vast stretches of molten terrain punctuated by jagged peaks, their tops shrouded in toxic, swirling clouds. "This is insane," muttered one of the junior engineers, a wiry man named Senek. He wiped a trembling hand across his sweat-streaked face. "We're flying into a death trap." "No arguments here," Rion said through gritted teeth. The ship lurched again, and a cacophony of alarms erupted from the cockpit. "How's she holding, Jorek?" Jorek Thane's gravelly voice barked back from the controls. "Barely. This planet's gravity is pulling us apart faster than I'd like. If you've got prayers, now's the time." Alira Vonn sat beside Rion, her face a mask of calm, though her hands betrayed her, gripping her datapad so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The faint hum of her telepathy radiated from her, brushing against the edges of Ryan's mind like a whisper he couldn't quite catch. "I don't need to read your thoughts to know you're terrified," she said, her voice low and steady. "Focus. Fear doesn't help us." Rion managed a shaky laugh. "Thanks for the pep talk, telepath. Next time, maybe less doom." The ship dipped sharply, plunging into a dense pocket of turbulence that made the hull scream in protest. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. The deafening roar of the engines, the choking heat of the cabin, the chaotic tremors that rattled through every bolt and seam. Rion closed his eyes, inhaling the sharp, bitter tang of burnt coolant, and tried to imagine they were anywhere else. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the turbulence eased. The ship leveled out, and the sound of alarms dimmed to a distant hum. Rion opened his eyes to a scene that stole his breath. The ground below was a chaotic mosaic of fire and ruin, vast rivers of lava carving molten veins through the landscape. But in the distance, rising above the devastation like a sentinel, stood the artifact's core, a towering obelisk of black stone etched with glowing alien glyphs. Its surface pulsed faintly, casting an eerie, rhythmic light that seemed to sync with the planet's tremors. "There it is," Alira murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "The artifact's core." Rion leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the structure. The glyphs shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though alive. "Looks friendly." "Friendly or not, we're here," Jorek growled, pulling the ship into a slow descent. "Gear up. We don't have time to admire the view." The ship touched down on a jagged plateau near the obelisk, the landing gear sinking into the unstable ground with a crunch. Rion unstrapped himself and grabbed his toolkit, the weight of the relay prototype slung over his shoulder like an anchor. The heat hit him the moment the hatch opened, a suffocating wave of scorching air laced with sulfur and ash. He coughed, his throat burning as he adjusted the filtration mask strapped to his face. Jorek stepped out first, his broad frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the hellish backdrop. His boots crunched on the rocky ground as he scanned the horizon, his weapon drawn. "Stay close. This place feels wrong." "Feels?" Rion asked, stepping down behind him. "Define wrong." Alira followed, her eyes fixed on the obelisk. "Like we're being watched." Rion's heart skipped a beat. He glanced around, his eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. The landscape was barren, but the oppressive heat and the ceaseless low rumble of the planet made it impossible to shake the sense of unseen eyes. They moved as a unit, crossing the treacherous terrain with deliberate steps. The ground beneath their feet felt alive, vibrating faintly as if echoing the heartbeat of the obelisk. The closer they drew, the more Rion's unease grew. The glyphs on the obelisk pulsed brighter now, their light casting ghostly patterns on the scorched ground. "Rion," Alira said suddenly, her voice tight. "The artifact. It's resonating again." Rion glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, resonating? I thought we disabled that." She shook her head, her eyes wide with something close to fear. "Not disabled, dormant, and it's waking up." The words had barely left her lips when the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A deafening crack tore through the air as fissures split the plateau, spewing plumes of noxious gas. Rion stumbled, his footing precarious as the ground shifted and buckled. "Move!" Jorek roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. They scrambled forward, the obelisk looming ever closer. Rion's pulse pounded in his ears, his lungs burning with every breath. The heat was unbearable now, searing through his suit and leaving his skin slick with sweat. Every step felt like a battle, his legs heavy, his mind screaming for him to turn back. But they reached the obelisk. Up close it was even more imposing, its surface a labyrinth of shifting glyphs that seemed to hum with energy. The light it cast was blinding, bathing them in an otherworldly glow that made their shadows dance like phantoms. "What now?" Jorek demanded, his gaze flicking between Rion and Alira. Rion dropped to his knees, fumbling with the relay prototype. His hands shook as he connected the cables, the metal burning hot against his palms. "We interface it, stabilize the resonance. Maybe, just maybe, it buys us enough time to figure out what's really going on." "And if it doesn't?" Jorek asked, his tone grim. Rion didn't answer. He didn't have to. Alira knelt beside him, her hands brushing against the artifact's surface. She flinched, her breath hitching as her telepathy connected with its alien energy. Her eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment she was still. "Alira?" Rion asked, his voice laced with panic. "What's happening?" She didn't respond. The glyphs on the obelisk flared brighter, their hum rising to a fever pitch. The relay prototype shuddered in Rion's hands, its core glowing faintly as it synced with the artifact. The air grew thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on them. Then, Alira gasped, her eyes snapping open. "It's not just a key," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a signal, and it's been answered." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Rion felt the blood drain from his face as the realization hit him. The obelisk wasn't just a piece of ancient technology. It was a beacon, and something was coming. The obelisk's glow dimmed to a rhythmic pulse, like the slowing heartbeat of a colossal beast. Rion Cade's chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths as the artifact hummed beneath his fingertips, its energy bleeding into the relay prototype still clutched in his shaking hands. Alira Vonn's words echoed in his mind, chilling him to the core. "It's been answered." "What's been answered?" Rion asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alira turned to him, her sharp green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and clarity. "The signal. It was a call for help, or a warning, and something out there heard it." Jorek Thane, standing guard a few paces away, scanned the horizon with his weapon drawn. The ground still trembled faintly, the dying planet's instability worsening with every passing moment. His reptilian features twisted into a grimace. "We don't have time for guesses. Whatever's coming, we need to be ready." Rion stood slowly, his muscles aching from the effort. He looked back at the prototype, a chaotic fusion of human engineering and ancient alien technology, now faintly glowing in sync with the obelisk's glyphs. "Ready how? I barely understand what this thing does. And now you're telling me it's lit a galactic flare?" Alira stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. "We stabilize it. The artifact's energy is tied to the singularity. It's trying to communicate. If we can decode the signal and channel it through the relay, We might be able to neutralize the singularity before it collapses this entire sector. Or, Jorek interrupted, his tone sharp, we could turn this whole planet into a supernova. Rion rubbed his temples, the heat pressing against him like a smothering hand. Well, that's comforting. But Alira's determination was unwavering. She pointed to the relay, its exposed circuit sparking faintly. We need to recalibrate the frequency. If the artifact is a signal, we have to tune into it fully to understand its message. And how do we do that without frying ourselves? Rion asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Last I checked, we weren't carrying a manual for alien death tech. Jorek's golden eyes narrowed. We adapt, like humans always do. The group retreated to the shelter of the ship, the obelisk still pulsing ominously behind them. Inside, the cramped cabin buzzed with activity as they set to work. Tools clattered against metal, holographic displays flickered with streams of data, and the acrid scent of solder and overheated circuits filled the air. Rion hunched over the relay, his fingers flying across the exposed wiring as he muttered to himself, All right, if we route the artifact's resonance through the prototype stabilizers, it should, emphasis on should, synchronize the frequency without overloading. Should? Jorek asked from his station near the cockpit. That's your plan? Rion shrugged, sweat dripping down his face. Got a better one? The relay sparked violently, sending a shower of blue light cascading across the cabin. Alira flinched but didn't back away, her focus locked on the holographic symbols projected from the artifact. She traced the shifting patterns with her fingertips, her telepathy brushing against their meaning like ripples in a still pond. It's not just a signal, she said softly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. It's a map of energy flows, directly tied to the singularity. A map to where? Jorek asked, his weapon resting against his knee. And don't say the other side. Alira didn't answer immediately. Her brow furrowed and she pressed her palms against the console, her breathing shallow. The other side? Or something far worse? Rion's stomach churned. Fantastic! So we're not just dealing with a collapsing singularity, we're dealing with whatever's on the other side of it. The team worked tirelessly, their exhaustion mounting with every passing minute. Rion's hands grew numb from the constant strain, the sharp tang of blood in his mouth from biting his lip too hard. Jorek patrolled the cabin, his boots thudding against the floor with a steady rhythm that somehow kept Rion grounded. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the relay emitted a low, resonant hum. The prototype's glow brightened, its circuits stabilizing as the artifact's energy flowed through it. Rion exhaled deeply, the relief washing over him like a wave. We've got stabilization, he said, slumping against the console. For now, anyway. Alira straightened, her face pale but resolute. Then we're ready to decode the map. Wait, Jorek said, stepping forward. Decode it how? Plug it in and hope it doesn't kill us? Rion chuckled weakly. Pretty much. Jorek shook his head, muttering something under his breath but didn't argue further. Alira activated the relay, the artifact's glyphs glowing brighter as the two technologies synced. The cabin filled with a low, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate in their bones. As the map unfolded on the holographic display, the air in the cabin seemed to grow heavier. The image was beautiful and terrifying, a web of swirling energy patterns radiating outward from the singularity, stretching across the galaxy in intricate fractal-like shapes. It's alive, Alira whispered, her voice barely audible. Rion leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the patterns. No, not alive. It's reacting, like it's waiting for something. What's it waiting for? Jorek asked, his tone dark. Us, Alira replied, her gaze locked on the display. It's waiting for us to decide. The weight of her words settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Rion felt his chest tighten, the enormity of their task pressing down on him. The singularity wasn't just a destructive force, it was a choice, and they were the ones who had to make it. We need to move, Rion said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. If the artifact's connected to the singularity, we have to deploy it inside the event horizon. It's the only way to stabilize it." "And if it doesn't stabilize?" Jorek asked, his hand resting on his weapon. Rion forced a smile. "Then I guess we won't have to worry about it." The team prepared for the final phase of their mission, their movements quick but deliberate. Jorek double-checked their weapons and reinforced the ship's shielding, his every action methodical and precise. Alira remained at the console, her focus unshakable as she monitored the artifact's energy. As they launched from the planet's surface, the obelisk's pulsing light faded into the background. The ship's engines roared as they ascended toward the singularity, its churning vortex a looming specter of destruction. Rion stared out the viewport, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the console. The singularity filled the screen, a swirling maelstrom of black and violet that seemed to defy logic itself. It was beautiful and terrible, a force of nature that cared nothing for the lives it threatened to consume. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "No turning back now." The ship shuddered as it approached the event horizon, the gravitational pull threatening to tear it apart. Alira's voice cut through the chaos, steady and clear. "The artifact's stabilizing. We've got a narrow window to deploy it." Rion nodded, his heart pounding. "Then let's hope we're not wrong." As the ship plunged into the singularity, the cabin was filled with blinding light and deafening noise. And then, just as suddenly, there was silence. The silence was absolute, an unnatural stillness that pressed against their ears and seemed to seep into their bones. The light that had filled the ship moments ago had faded, replaced by an eerie, colorless void that stretched endlessly in every direction. Rion Cade sat frozen in his chair, his fingers gripping the edge of the console so tightly his knuckles were white. He dared not move, dared not breathe, as if even the faintest whisper might shatter whatever fragile balance kept them suspended within the singularity. "We're still here?" Jorek Thane's voice was low, disbelieving, breaking the oppressive quiet. His reptilian gaze darted to the viewport, scanning the surreal emptiness beyond. "How?" "I don't know," Rion whispered. His voice sounded distant, muffled, as if the void were swallowing the sound. "I don't know what this place is." "This isn't a place," Alira Vonn said, her tone taut, almost reverent. She stood at the console, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the holographic display. "It's a boundary, the edge of what we understand, and it's waiting for us." The artifact sat in the center of the cabin, glowing faintly, its glyphs shifting like liquid light. Its energy filled the air with a subtle vibration, a sound felt more than heard. Rion tore his gaze from the artifact to look at Alira. "What do you mean, waiting?" She turned to face him, her sharp green eyes glinting with a mix of fear and wonder. "It's alive, Rion. Not like us, but in a way we can't fully comprehend. It doesn't just want to stabilize the singularity. It's testing us." "Testing us for what?" Jorek asked, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "Survival? Submission? What kind of intelligence plays games with an entire galaxy?" Alira hesitated, her hands clenching into fists. "It's not playing games. It's searching for something, for someone who can take the next step." Rion felt a chill crawl down his spine. "The next step? You mean—" "Evolution," Alira interrupted, her voice soft but resolute. "Not just physical or technological. It's asking if we can think beyond ourselves, if we can make choices not out of fear, but out of understanding." Jorek's golden eyes narrowed. "And if we fail?" Alira's silence was answer enough. Rion exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stand. His body ached from the relentless strain of the mission, but he pushed it aside. He approached the artifact, the faint hum growing stronger as he neared it. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting the light, as if reality itself were bending to its presence. "All right," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "If it wants answers, we'll give it answers, but on our terms." Jorek stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the cabin. "You're assuming it even cares about terms, Cade. For all we know, it's already decided." "Then why are we still here?" Rion shot back, turning to face him. If it wanted to wipe us out, it would have done it already. Maybe it's not looking for perfection. Maybe it's looking for someone willing to try, even when they're out of their depth. Like humans always are, Jorek muttered, though there was no malice in his tone. Alira stepped closer to the artifact, her eyes scanning its shifting glyphs. It's reacting to us, our thoughts, our actions. Everything we do changes the way it resonates. That's why it chose to respond now, because we're flawed, chaotic, and that chaos makes us unpredictable. Rion nodded, his mind racing. And unpredictability is our greatest strength. We don't solve problems the right way. We solve them our way. Jorek's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he placed a heavy hand on Rion's shoulder, his grip firm. Then lead, Cade. If this is humanity's test, you're the one holding the answers. Rion swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling over him like a mantle. He turned to the console, his fingers dancing over the controls as he synchronized the artifact's energy with the relay. The prototype shuddered, its circuits glowing as the singularity's power flowed through it. The cabin filled with light once more, but this time it was different, softer, warmer, like the glow of a distant star. The artifact's glyphs pulsed faster, their rhythm matching the steady thrum of Rion's heartbeat. The holographic map reappeared, its fractal patterns shimmering with impossible beauty. "It's responding," Alira said, her voice barely audible. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Rion's hands moved faster, his every motion precise despite the sweat dripping from his brow. He felt the artifact's energy coursing through him, its hum resonating in his chest. The relay's glow intensified, and the holographic map began to shift, its patterns converging on a single point at the heart of the singularity. "There," Rion said, pointing to the display. "That's the focal point. If we can direct the artifact's energy there, we can stabilize it." "And if we're wrong?" Jorek asked, his voice low. Rion didn't look away from the display. "Then we'll make the biggest mistake humanity's ever made. But at least it'll be ours." He activated the relay, and the artifact flared with blinding light. The ship shuddered violently as the singularity's energy surged through it, its pull threatening to tear them apart. The void outside the viewport twisted and writhed, its colorless expanse fracturing into shards of light and shadow. Rion gritted his teeth, his hands steady as he adjusted the relay's parameters. The artifact's hum grew louder, deafening, until it felt like the sound was coming from within him. The singularity's vortex began to shift, its chaotic swirl slowing, stabilizing. "It's working!" Alira shouted, her voice barely audible over the noise. "The energy is balancing." But as the singularity calmed, the artifact emitted a final burst of light, its glyphs flashing in a sequence too fast to follow. Rion felt a jolt of heat and electricity surge through him, and for a brief moment, his vision filled with images, galaxies spinning, stars being born, and an ancient intelligence watching, waiting. Then, silence. The ship steadied, the vibration fading. The singularity outside the viewport was gone, replaced by the serene blackness of space. Rion slumped back in his chair, his body trembling as the weight of what they had done settled over him. Jorek let out a low, relieved breath. "We're alive." "Barely," Rion muttered, his voice hoarse. He turned to Alira. "What about the artifact?" She approached it cautiously, her hand hovering over its now dim surface. "It's dormant. Whatever intelligence was guiding it, it's gone." "Gone? Or watching?" Jorek asked, his tone skeptical. Rion smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Doesn't matter. We showed them what we're made of." Alira's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Flaws and all." Rion leaned back, staring out at the stars. "Yeah, and maybe those flaws are exactly what they needed to see." The silence that followed was heavy but hopeful. They had faced the impossible, and while they hadn't come out unscathed, they had proven one undeniable truth. Humanity's chaos, its mistakes, its resilience, was its greatest strength. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, the universe was watching,